Her boss, with a smug, cruel grin, leaned in close and said, "Now Madison is mine. She knows it. You'll keep funding her, of course. Her clothes, her dinners, her everything. And if you even think of resisting me, I'll ruin you." My mind went blank for a moment, the sheer audacity of his words hanging in the air like a bomb about to explode. "What the hell are you talking about?" I finally managed to spit out, my voice low but shaking with barely controlled rage. Ethan, her boss, didn't flinch. Instead, he took a slow sip of his whiskey, as if he had all the power in the world, which, in that moment, he did. "Oh, Jason, don't play dumb. Madison made her choice weeks ago. You're just a formality now, a means to an end. She wants me. And you? You're just in the way." I glanced across the room. There she was, Madison, my wife of 7 years, standing under the golden chandelier in her blood-red dress. She looked like a queen, her laughter echoing through the room as she charmed a group of colleagues. Her beauty was undeniable, but now, it felt like a weapon pointed straight at my heart. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. Was this some kind of twisted power play? A sick joke? But the way Ethan spoke, so casually, so confidently, it was clear. This wasn't a game to him. This was real. "You're lying," I said, more to myself than to him. "Madison wouldn't. She couldn't." Ethan cut me off with a low chuckle. "Oh, she could. She already has. I mean, look at her, Jason. Do you think someone like her is satisfied with, well, someone like you?" His words were a knife to the gut, but I refused to let him see how much they hurt. Instead, I turned back to Madison, my mind racing. I needed proof, evidence, something to confront her with. But the way she avoided looking my way, the way she seemed so perfectly at ease, like nothing was wrong, it was all starting to add up. The late nights at the office, the sudden interest in dressing up for work, the secretive texts and phone calls. I had pushed it all aside, convinced myself it was just stress or coincidence. But now, standing there under the crushing weight of Ethan's words, it all came crashing down. "What's your endgame here?" I asked, my voice steadying as anger replaced shock. "Why are you telling me this? You could have just kept it between the two of you, so why rub it in my face?" Ethan smirked, leaning even closer, his breath reeking of expensive whiskey. "Because I want you to understand something, Jason. I own her now, and by extension, I own you. Every pathetic dollar you make, every ounce of effort you put into trying to keep her happy, it's all for me now. You're not her husband anymore. You're her servant. My servant." The room felt like it was spinning. My fists clenched at my sides, and for a brief, dangerous moment, I considered swinging at him, wiping that smug grin off his face. But that's exactly what he wanted. A scene, a meltdown. And I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked away, my mind a storm of rage and disbelief. I needed to confront Madison, to hear it from her lips. But as I made my way across the room, weaving through the crowd, she spotted me and quickly excused herself, slipping through a side door into the hallway. I followed her, my heart pounding in my chest. When I caught up to her, she was adjusting her makeup in the gilded mirror by the coat rack, her expression unreadable. "Madison," I said, my voice low but firm, "we need to talk. Now." She turned to me with a practiced look of mild annoyance, as if I had interrupted her during something important. "What is it, Jason? Can it wait? I'm mingling." "Cut the crap," I snapped, my patience worn thin. "Ethan just told me everything." Her eyes flickered for a fraction of a second. Shock, guilt, something. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by a mask of feigned confusion. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Madison. He told me about the two of you. About how you've been sneaking around behind my back. About how I'm just supposed to keep funding your little fairy tale while he takes over my life." She sighed dramatically, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Jason, you're overreacting. Ethan likes to mess with people. He's probably just trying to get under your skin. Don't let him ruin the evening." But her tone was too casual, too dismissive. And that flicker of something in her eyes, it was there again, haunting me. She was lying. I knew it. Deep down, I had known it for a long time. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a near whisper. Madison, look me in the eye and tell me he's lying. Tell me you haven't been sneaking around with him. Tell me you haven't betrayed me. She hesitated, just for a moment, but it was long enough. Long enough for the truth to spill out in the silence between us. And then, she smirked. Not a smile, not an apology, but a cold, cruel smirk that sent a shiver down my spine. You really want to do this here? She said, her voice dripping with mockery. Fine. Yes, Jason. Ethan and I are together. And you know what? It's been the best decision I've ever made. He's everything you're not. Powerful, confident, successful. Maybe if you weren't so ordinary, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but she wasn't done. So go ahead, she continued, her tone icy. Throw your little tantrum. Make a scene. But just know, it won't change anything. Ethan's right. You're nothing but a placeholder. And I'm done pretending otherwise. I stared at her, my world crumbling around me. This wasn't the woman I married. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew. But as much as her words hurt, they also lit a fire inside me. A fire I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stood frozen, her venomous words echoing in my mind. The confident, cruel smirk on her face was like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. This wasn't the Madison I had vowed to love and protect. No, this was someone else entirely. A stranger wearing the face of the woman I once adored. Are you serious right now? I managed to say, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. You think you can just stand here and humiliate me like this? Madison crossed her arms and leaned against the wall, exuding the kind of arrogance that made me want to scream. Humiliate you? Jason, don't be so dramatic. I'm just being honest. You've wanted honesty for years, haven't you? Well, here it is. You're not enough for me anymore. I've outgrown you. Her words hit like thunderclaps, but I refused to let her see me crumble. I couldn't. Not here. Not now. You're unbelievable, I spat, my voice low and sharp. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? By sneaking around with your boss? Madison rolled her eyes, a gesture so dismissive it nearly broke me. Oh, don't act like you're some saint, Jason. You're boring. Predictable. Do you know how exhausting it is to come home to someone who's stuck in the same routine day after day? Ethan, on the other hand... Stop. I cut her off, my voice rising. I don't want to hear another word about him. She raised an eyebrow, a twisted smile forming on her lips. Why not? Does it hurt? Good. Maybe now you'll finally wake up and realize you were never enough for someone like me. I took a step back, struggling to breathe under the weight of her cruelty. This wasn't just betrayal. It was annihilation. She wasn't trying to justify her actions. She was reveling in them, enjoying the destruction she was causing. But as the anger boiled inside me, something else began to surface. Clarity. I realized I had two choices. I could let her words destroy me, or I could use them to fuel what came next. You're a coward, I said, my voice steady now. Too weak to admit your own failures, so you lash out at me to justify your actions. But let me tell you something, Madison. You and Ethan, you deserve each other. Two snakes slithering around in the dark, feeding off each other's toxicity. But don't think for 1 second that I'm going to just sit back and let you walk all over me. Madison laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent a chill through my spine. Oh, Jason, you're not going to do anything. You don't have it in you. That's why this is so easy for me, because you'll always be the nice guy who lets everyone step on him. Her words stung, but they also lit a fire inside me, a fire I hadn't felt in years. I straightened my back, my jaw tightening. You'll regret underestimating me, I said, my voice low and firm. Madison's smile faltered for a brief moment, but she quickly recovered, brushing past me as though I were nothing more than an inconvenience. We'll see about that, she said over her shoulder, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she disappeared back into the party. I stood there for a moment, trying to collect myself. The humiliation, the rage, the heartbreak. It was all too much. But then I remembered something Ethan had said. Resist me, and I'll leave you with nothing. What did he mean by that? What power did he think he had over me? As much as I hated him, I couldn't ignore the warning in his voice. This wasn't just about Madison cheating. This was about control, and I needed to figure out what he was planning. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking as I scrolled through Madison's messages. She had been careless lately, leaving her phone unattended, assuming I wasn't paying attention. And now, that carelessness was going to cost her. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. A series of texts between Madison and Ethan, their messages laced with the kind of arrogance that made my blood boil. Ethan, can't wait to see you tonight. Make sure Jason stays out of the way. Madison, don't worry. He's clueless, as always. Ethan, good. The less he knows, the better. We can't afford for him to screw this up. What the hell were they planning? It was more than just an affair. There was something bigger at play, something they didn't want me to know about. And that's when it hit me. Ethan wasn't just after Madison. He was after me. I scrolled further, piecing together their plan. Madison had been funneling money from our joint account into a separate one, transferring small amounts over time to avoid suspicion. And Ethan? He was the mastermind behind it all, using Madison to bleed me dry. My heart raced as I realized the extent of their betrayal. This wasn't just about love or lust. This was calculated, deliberate destruction. They wanted to ruin me, to leave me with nothing. But they had underestimated me. Ethan thought I was weak, and Madison thought I was blind. But they were wrong. Dead wrong. I put my phone away, my mind racing with ideas. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. But I wasn't going to play by their rules. No, I was going to turn the tables, and I was going to make them regret every single moment of this betrayal. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I left the party early, my mind a storm of fury and determination. The betrayal was raw, but I couldn't afford to dwell on it. Madison and Ethan were scheming, and if I let my emotions take over, they'd win. No, I needed to outthink them. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about survival. As I drove home, I replayed everything Ethan had said. His smug tone, his audacity to approach me in public, the way he flaunted his control over Madison and, by extension, over me. The arrogance of it burned like acid in my veins. He thought he'd cornered me, that I was powerless. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people like Ethan always underestimate the quiet ones. Once home, I poured myself a stiff drink and sat down with my laptop. If they were siphoning money from me, I needed to see the full extent of it. Logging into my bank account, I combed through the transactions. Madison had been transferring small amounts to a new account for over a year. Individually, they were subtle, just a couple $100s here and there. But added up, it was tens of thousands. Tens of thousands. My hands gripped the edge of the desk as the realization settled over me. Madison wasn't just unfaithful, she was a thief. She had been methodically stripping me of everything I'd worked for, and I hadn't even noticed. But now, I had evidence. Cold, hard proof of her betrayal. It wasn't just emotional anymore. It was financial, and that gave me leverage. I spent the next few hours gathering everything I could. Screenshots of the transfers, copies of their texts from her phone, records of her strange expenses that never made sense to me until now. A paper trail of lies. If they wanted to play dirty, I was ready to match them. The next step was figuring out their endgame. What did they want? Why go to such lengths? I decided to start with Madison's phone. It was a risk. If she caught me snooping, it could blow everything up before I was ready. But I needed answers. When she finally came home, well after midnight, she was tipsy and glowing with arrogance. "You left early," she said, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Are you okay?" I forced a smile. "Just wasn't feeling well," I said, my tone neutral. "But I'm fine now. How was the rest of the party?" She shrugged, kicking off her heels and heading to the kitchen for water. "Same as always. You didn't miss much." Her phone buzzed on the counter, and I glanced at the screen. Ethan's name flashed across it, along with a new message. "Miss you already. Can't wait for tomorrow." I clenched my jaw but said nothing. She picked up the phone, saw the message, and quickly locked the screen before giving me a fake smile. Long day, she said, yawning dramatically. I'm heading to bed. Good night, I replied, watching her retreat to the bedroom. I waited until I heard the sound of her even breathing before making my move. Quietly, I crept into the bedroom and retrieved her phone from the nightstand. I'd memorized her passcode long ago. It was the same one she'd been using for years. As I scrolled through her messages, my heart pounded in my chest. There were more texts with Ethan, each more disgusting than the last. They talked about their future, about how they'd celebrate once I was out of the picture. But then I found something that made my blood run cold. Ethan, did you get Jason to sign the papers yet? We can't move forward until he's out of the way. Madison, not yet. He's suspicious after tonight. I'll wait until he calms down. Ethan, hurry up. The sooner we have everything, the sooner we can get rid of him for good. Papers? What papers? And get rid of him? What did that even mean? I searched further and found references to a business deal Ethan was working on, one that required a significant cash investment. And suddenly, it all made sense. Madison was funneling my money into Ethan's scheme, using me to bankroll his ambitions. And those papers they mentioned? A quick search through the bedroom revealed a folder Madison had hidden in her closet. Inside were documents, a power of attorney, a transfer of assets, and even divorce papers. She was planning to strip me of everything and leave me with nothing. My chest tightened as I stared at the paperwork. This wasn't just betrayal, it was annihilation. They weren't content with ruining my marriage. They wanted to ruin my life. But they had underestimated me. I spent the rest of the night planning my next move. If they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. But I wasn't going to lash out in anger or make a scene. No, I was going to play this smart. Strategic. They thought they had the upper hand, but they didn't realize I was already one step ahead. By dawn, I had a plan. First, I contacted a lawyer. Ruthless, no-nonsense type I knew from a recommendation years ago. I laid everything out. The stolen money, the affair, the forged documents. We can use this, she said, her voice sharp and confident. If what you're saying is true, we'll destroy them. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Next, I called my bank and froze the joint account, effectively cutting off Madison's access. I also started moving my personal funds into a separate account under my name only. If she wanted to drain me, she'd have to find another target. Finally, I set up a meeting with Ethan. He didn't know what was coming, but he would soon. This wasn't just about defending myself anymore. It was about making them pay for what they'd done. As I stood in the shower that morning, letting the hot water wash over me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. Madison and Ethan thought they were unstoppable, but they had made one crucial mistake. They underestimated me. The meeting with Ethan was scheduled for later in the week, but I wasn't going to sit idly by until then. Every minute felt like a countdown, a boiling pot of rage and strategy waiting to overflow. I had spent years being the guy who avoided confrontation, who kept the peace, who let things slide for the sake of harmony. That guy was gone now. The first step was to make Ethan feel comfortable, secure, even. I called him that morning, my voice as calm as I could muster. Ethan, I began, forcing politeness into every word. I've been thinking about our conversation at the party. I overreacted. I'd like to meet up and clear the air. There was a pause on the other end before his smug voice came through. Glad to hear you're finally being reasonable, Jason. I'll send you the address for my office. Let's hash things out like men. The audacity of this man almost made me laugh. He had no idea what was coming. After hanging up, I turned my attention to Madison. She had no clue I had found the documents or uncovered the financial theft. Her arrogance worked in my favor, as she assumed I'd retreat into silence and denial like I always had before. But this time, I decided to play her own game against her. At breakfast, she was scrolling through her phone, pretending I didn't exist. I sat across from her, sipping my coffee, letting the tension build. Finally, I broke the silence. Madison, I was thinking, you're right. She looked up, her perfectly groomed eyebrow arched in curiosity. About what? About us. About everything, I said, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. You deserve more than what I've been giving you. I've been stuck in a rut, and I want to change that, for you. For us. Her expression flickered, just for a second, with something that looked like confusion, maybe even guilt. But then her smirk returned, and she leaned back in her chair, studying me like a predator sizing up its prey. I'm glad you're finally seeing things clearly, Jason. It's about time. I wanted to snap, to call her out right then and there, but I bit my tongue. This wasn't the time to confront her. Not yet. I needed her to believe she was still in control. I was thinking we should spend some time apart, I continued, keeping my voice steady. You've been under a lot of stress lately, and I think some space might help us figure things out. Madison blinked, clearly caught off guard. Space. Yeah, I said, nodding. You could stay at a hotel for a few days, clear your head. I'll cover the cost, of course. She hesitated, her calculating mind likely working overtime. She wasn't sure if this was a trap or a gift, but eventually, her greed won out. That might be a good idea, she said, her voice softening. I've been feeling overwhelmed lately. A break could be nice. Great, I said, smiling. I'll book the room for you. Take as much time as you need. As soon as she left for work, I sprang into action. I contacted my lawyer again, updating her on the situation. She agreed that getting Madison out of the house was the perfect opportunity to gather more evidence without interference. Over the next 2 days, I turned the house upside down. I went through every drawer, every closet, every digital device Madison had left behind. What I found only added fuel to the fire. There were receipts for extravagant purchases, jewelry, spa treatments, expensive dinners that I never saw. There were emails between her and Ethan discussing next steps and contingency plans. And then, in the depths of her personal laptop, I found something that made my blood run cold. A file titled Escape Plan. Inside was a detailed breakdown of how she and Ethan planned to strip me of everything. The forged documents, the siphoned funds, even a timeline for when she would serve me divorce papers. But the worst part? There was a section labeled Psychological Manipulation, where they had outlined ways to gaslight me into signing over my assets without question. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling with rage. This wasn't just betrayal, it was warfare. But now, I had all the ammunition I needed. The morning of my meeting with Ethan, I was calm. Too calm. Madison had stayed out of the house since our break, and she had no idea what I was planning. I dressed sharply, making sure I looked every bit the confident man Ethan thought he had broken. When I arrived at his office, he greeted me with that same smug grin I'd come to hate. "Jason," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Glad you came. Let's talk." I followed him into his sleek, modern office, the kind of place designed to intimidate. He poured himself a drink and offered me one, but I declined. I wanted to keep my head clear. "So," he began, leaning back in his leather chair, "I assume you've come to terms with reality. Madison and I are moving forward, and it's best if you step aside gracefully. We can make this easy, or we can make it hard. Your choice." I smiled, a genuine, confident smile that made his own falter for a split second. "Oh, I've come to terms with reality, Ethan, but I think you're going to find this harder than you expected." I pulled out a folder from my bag and slid it across the desk. "This," I said, "is a full account of everything you and Madison have been doing behind my back. The financial theft, the forgery, the texts, it's all here. And I've already shared it with my lawyer." Ethan's face darkened as he opened the folder, his arrogant demeanor crumbling with each page he turned. "You underestimated me," I said, my voice steady and calm. "You thought I'd just roll over and let you destroy me. But here's the thing. You made a mistake. And now, you're going to pay for it." Ethan's face was a mask of disbelief as he stared at the evidence in front of him. His fingers trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages, his smirk nowhere to be found now. For the first time, he wasn't in control, and he knew it. "What is this?" he finally muttered, his voice shaky. "You think this is enough to stop me?" I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms. "Oh, I don't think, Ethan, I know. You see, the financial theft alone is enough to get you both locked up. Madison might have thought she was clever, siphoning money in small amounts, but guess what? Banks love patterns, and they love exposing fraud. And as for you, I gestured toward the section of documents highlighting his own texts and emails. Let's just say you've left a very messy trail. He glared at me, but I could see the fear creeping into his expression. You think you're smart, don't you? He sneered, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. This doesn't prove anything. It's circumstantial at best. I smiled, my calm demeanor only rattling him further. You really don't get it, do you? This is just the beginning. I've already sent copies of everything to my lawyer, my bank, and, oh, this is the fun part, a few key people in your company's HR department. You think you're untouchable because you're the boss? Think again. Once they see this, you'll be lucky if you leave with a severance package. His jaw tightened, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was calculating, scrambling for a way out. So what do you want, Jason? He finally asked, his voice low and seething. What's your play here? I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. My play is simple. You're going to cut ties with Madison. No more communication, no more scheming. You're going to let her deal with the fallout of her actions alone. And as for the money, you're going to reimburse every single cent she stole from me. I don't care how you do it. Sell your car, liquidate your assets, beg your investors. But you will pay me back. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. And if I don't? I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. If you don't, this recording of our conversation, combined with the evidence I've already gathered, goes straight to the police. And trust me, Ethan, embezzlement and fraud aren't exactly things that go unnoticed in your line of work. His eyes widened as he realized I had been recording him the entire time. He opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. Don't even think about trying to weasel your way out of this. You've spent years manipulating people, using their weaknesses against them. But this time, you picked the wrong guy. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his confidence shattered. He was cornered, and he knew it. For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then, finally, he sighed. Fine, I'll pay you back. But Madison, she's not going to just let this go. I stood up, towering over him as I stared him down. That's not your problem anymore. She made her choice, and now she's going to live with it. And if she tries to come after me, well, let's just say she won't like what happens next. I turned and walked out of his office, leaving him to stew in his defeat. As the elevator doors closed behind me, I felt a strange sense of relief. This wasn't over yet, far from it, but I had taken the first step in reclaiming control of my life. When I got home, I found Madison waiting for me in the living room, her arms crossed and her expression icy. Where were you? She demanded, her voice sharp. Meeting with Ethan, I replied casually, setting my bag down and pouring myself a glass of water. Her eyes narrowed. What do you mean, meeting with Ethan? What did you say to him? I turned to face her, my expression calm but firm. I told him the truth, that I know everything. About the money, the affair, the plans to ruin me. All of it. Her face went pale, but she quickly recovered, crossing her arms tighter. You had no right. I had every right, I snapped, cutting her off. You betrayed me, Madison. You lied to me, stole from me, and tried to destroy me. And now, you're going to deal with the consequences. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop her. Save it. I don't want to hear your excuses. You and Ethan underestimated me, and now it's going to cost you both. Madison's eyes flashed with anger, but she said nothing. For the first time in years, she didn't have the upper hand, and it showed. She was cornered, just like Ethan, and there was no way out. I picked up the folder of evidence and held it out to her. Take a good look at this. It's everything I've gathered against you. And if you try to fight me on this, I'll use it. Don't test me, Madison. You'll lose. Her hands trembled as she took the folder, flipping through the pages. For a moment, I thought I saw tears in her eyes, but I couldn't bring myself to care. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. As I walked out of the room, I felt a sense of closure. This wasn't the end, but it was the beginning of the end. Madison and Ethan had thought they could destroy me, but they were wrong. They didn't realize I wasn't just fighting for my dignity, I was fighting for my life. The next morning, I woke up to find Madison already gone. Her car was missing from the driveway, and the house was eerily silent. A part of me wondered if she had run off to Ethan, desperate to salvage what little power they had left. But deep down, I knew Madison too well. She wasn't the type to surrender easily. I checked my phone and, sure enough, there were messages from her. Long, dramatic paragraphs filled with every manipulative tactic in the book. Madison, Jason, I can't believe you're doing this to me. I was frustrated, lonely, and you pushed me into Ethan's arms. This is as much your fault as it is mine. But I love you, and I know we can fix this if you just stop being so stubborn. Madison, don't ruin us because of one mistake. Think about everything we've been through. Please, Jason, let's talk. Madison, if you go through with this, you'll regret it. I promise you. Her desperation was almost laughable, but it didn't distract me from my goal. I knew this was her attempt to regain control, to make me second-guess myself. But there was no going back. Not after everything I'd uncovered. I spent the day preparing for the next steps. My lawyer and I were working on freezing more of Madison's assets and filing the necessary documents to protect myself financially. Meanwhile, I kept a close eye on my surroundings, knowing Madison wouldn't just let things play out quietly. That evening, as I was finishing dinner, I heard the unmistakable sound of her car pulling into the driveway. A storm was brewing, both outside, with heavy rain beginning to pound against the windows, and inside, with the tension rising to unbearable levels. The front door slammed open, and Madison walked in, her face a mix of anger and desperation. She was soaked from the rain, her hair plastered to her face, but she didn't care. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I knew she was ready for a fight. Jason, she started, her voice sharp and filled with venom. We need to talk. Now. I set my fork down calmly and leaned back in my chair. What's there to talk about, Madison? I think everything's already been said. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. Don't do this. Don't destroy us over some stupid mistake. I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. A mistake? Madison, this wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated plan to ruin me. You and Ethan didn't just betray me. You tried to erase me. And now you want to stand here and act like you're the victim. She flinched at my words but quickly recovered, her tone shifting to something more pleading. I'm sorry, okay? I made a mistake, but I was only trying to protect myself. You don't understand the pressure I've been under. Oh, I understand perfectly, I said, standing up and walking toward her. You've been under pressure to impress Ethan, to play the role of his little accomplice while you drained our accounts and forged documents behind my back. And for what? To live a fantasy with a man who doesn't give a damn about you? Her face twisted with anger. Ethan cares about me more than you ever did. He supports me, Jason. He believes in me. Believes in you? I scoffed. He's using you, Madison. The moment you're no longer useful to him, he'll throw you away like yesterday's trash. You think he loves you? He loves what you can do for him. That's it. She opened her mouth to argue but stopped, her face falling as the weight of my words began to sink in. For a brief moment, I saw the cracks in her armor, the fear she tried so hard to hide. But then, like clockwork, her anger returned. You think you're so righteous, don't you? Acting like you're the victim here. Well, newsflash, Jason, you're not perfect either. You've been distant, cold, and completely uninterested in me for years. Maybe if you'd been a better husband, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere. Her words stung, but I didn't let them shake me. Nice try, I said, my voice calm and steady. But we're not doing this. You don't get to shift the blame onto me. This is on you, Madison. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. The room fell silent, the only sound the rain hammering against the windows. Madison's chest rose and fell with each shaky breath, her mind racing for a way out. But there was none. Not anymore. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens now? I crossed my arms, staring her down. What happens now is simple. You'll sign over every penny you stole from me. You'll cooperate with the divorce proceedings. And you'll stay out of my life. If you try to fight me on this, I'll make sure everyone, your friends, your family, even Ethan, knows exactly what you've done. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in them. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. Oh, and one more thing, I added, stepping closer. You think Ethan cares about you? You think he'll protect you? You might want to check your email. I sent him a copy of everything I've uncovered, along with a little note suggesting he reconsider his involvement with you. Madison's face turned pale as she fumbled for her phone, frantically opening her email. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the messages, her breathing growing more erratic with each passing second. No, she whispered, shaking her head. You didn't. I did, I said coldly. This is the end, Madison. You wanted to play dirty? Fine. But you're playing against someone who's done being your victim. She dropped the phone, her composure completely shattered. For the first time in years, I saw her for what she truly was. Not the confident, manipulative woman who had once controlled me, but a desperate, broken person who had finally been exposed. I walked past her and headed upstairs, leaving her alone in the living room. As I closed the door to the bedroom, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This wasn't the closure I had wanted, but it was the closure I needed. Madison and Ethan had tried to destroy me, but they had failed. And now, it was their turn to face the consequences. The next morning, I awoke to a string of messages from an unknown number. At first, I thought it might be Madison trying to use another angle to manipulate me, but when I opened the messages, I saw they were from Ethan. Ethan, you son of a... How dare you send that email to my board? Do you have any idea what you've done? Ethan, we need to talk. Now. Ethan, call me, or I swear you'll regret this. I smiled. The email I had sent wasn't just to him. It was to his company's board of directors. The evidence I attached wasn't limited to the personal betrayal. It also included proof of his financial misconduct, as well as his collusion with Madison to siphon funds from me. For a corporate shark like Ethan, nothing was more terrifying than his professional empire crumbling. Instead of replying, I sent a single text back. You're not in control anymore. You never were. I put the phone down, poured myself a coffee, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. By midday, my lawyer called with the news I'd been hoping for. Ethan's company had launched an internal investigation. The board had frozen his accounts and placed him on administrative leave pending a full review. In short, he was finished. But the cherry on top came in the form of Madison. I knew she'd run to him once she realized her safety net, me, was gone. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly their alliance would implode. That evening, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Jason, Madison's frantic voice came through the line. You need to stop this. Please, you've made your point. I stayed silent, letting her squirm in the uncomfortable silence. Ethan's furious, she continued, her voice breaking. He's blaming me for everything. He says I ruined him. He's threatening to cut me off completely. My jaw tightened, but I forced myself to remain calm. So, he's abandoning you? Shocking. Who could have seen that coming? Jason, please, she pleaded, her tone desperate. I know I messed up, but you can't destroy both of us like this. Ethan's talking about suing me for slander, for God knows what. I'm scared. I laughed bitterly. You're scared? That's rich, Madison. Were you scared when you were plotting to destroy me? When you were sneaking around, stealing my money, forging documents? No, you weren't. You were confident. You were untouchable. And now you want my sympathy? Her silence spoke volumes. I told you this would happen, I continued, my voice cold. I warned you that Ethan would toss you aside the moment you became a liability. But you didn't listen. You thought you were invincible. Jason, she whispered, barely audible. I don't know what to do. Here's what you do, I said sharply. You sign the divorce papers. You cooperate with the financial recovery process. And then you disappear from my life. Because if you don't, Madison, I will make sure you lose everything. Do you understand me? Her shaky breath was the only response I needed. Without another word, I hung up. The following day, I received confirmation from my lawyer that Madison had agreed to my terms. She signed the papers, relinquished her claim to any of my remaining assets, and provided access to the funds she had siphoned away. It wasn't the full amount. Some of it was long gone, but it was enough to ensure I could rebuild. Ethan, however, wasn't so lucky. News of his misdeeds had spread like wildfire through his company, and the media caught wind of it soon after. His name was splashed across headlines, his reputation in tatters. And Madison? She was nowhere to be found in the fallout. Likely, she had realized Ethan was no longer a viable lifeline and disappeared to lick her wounds. Despite everything, I wasn't satisfied yet. There was still one last piece to the puzzle: closure. I arranged one final meeting with Ethan. This time, it was on my terms, in a neutral public setting, a quiet coffee shop where he couldn't cause a scene. When he arrived, he looked like a shadow of the man he had been. The tailored suits, the smug grin, the air of invincibility, all gone. He sat across from me, his face pale and drawn, his hands shaking as he reached for his coffee. "What do you want, Jason?" he muttered, his voice hoarse. "You've already ruined me. What more could you possibly take?" I leaned back in my chair, studying him for a moment. "I don't want anything from you, Ethan. Not anymore. I just wanted you to understand something." He raised an eyebrow, his expression wary. "You thought you were untouchable," I said calmly. "You thought you could take whatever you wanted, destroy whoever you wanted, and walk away without consequences. But now you see the truth. People like you aren't invincible. You're just as fragile as the rest of us." He scoffed, shaking his head. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No," I replied. "It's supposed to make you think. Because the next time you try to ruin someone's life, you might want to remember this moment. And if you don't, well, I'll make sure the world remembers it for you." Ethan stared at me, his eyes filled with equal parts hatred and defeat. He didn't respond, and I didn't wait for him to. I stood up, threw a few bills on the table for my coffee, and walked out without looking back. As I stepped outside, the cool evening air hit my face, and for the first time in months, I felt truly free. Madison and Ethan had tried to break me, to destroy everything I had built, but they had failed. And now, they were the ones left in ruins. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice, and it felt damn good. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Ethan's downfall became the talk of the town, his name synonymous with scandal and failure. The media ran with the story, dissecting every detail of his misdeeds. His company ousted him completely, replacing him with an interim CEO who wasted no time severing all ties to Ethan's shady deals. His reputation, his power, and his carefully curated life were gone in an instant. Madison, on the other hand, faded into obscurity. She disappeared after our final confrontation, likely trying to escape the chaos she had helped create. I didn't care where she went or what she did. She was no longer my problem. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to the airtight case my lawyer and I had built, and I was finally free of her manipulative grasp. But freedom came with its own challenges. For weeks, I found myself wrestling with the emotional aftermath of everything that had happened. Betrayal, anger, and heartbreak lingered like ghosts, haunting me in quiet moments. I would sit in the silence of my now empty house, staring at the life I had built and wondering how I had let it fall apart. But then, something shifted. One evening, as I was organizing the last remnants of Madison's belongings to donate, I found an old photo of myself before her. In the picture, I was smiling, carefree, and full of life. It struck me how far I had strayed from the person I used to be, how much I had given up for someone who didn't deserve it. That night, I made a decision. It wasn't enough to survive what had happened. I needed to thrive. I needed to rebuild, not just my finances or my reputation, but myself. I started small. I joined a gym, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for. I reconnected with old friends, people I had distanced myself from during my marriage. I threw myself into my work, finding a renewed passion for my career that I hadn't felt in years. Slowly but surely, I began to piece my life back together. One of the most unexpected moments came when I was invited to speak at a local business event. A colleague had heard about what I went through and thought my story of resilience could inspire others. At first, I was hesitant. What did I have to offer? But as I stood on that stage, sharing my journey of betrayal, discovery, and recovery, I realized something powerful. My pain had a purpose. The audience responded with overwhelming support, and many shared their own stories of overcoming personal and professional setbacks. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt strong. The experience opened new doors for me. I began mentoring others who were going through similar struggles, helping them navigate their own paths to recovery. It became a passion, a way to turn my darkest moments into something meaningful. One day, months later, as I was wrapping up a session with a young entrepreneur, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from an old acquaintance who worked in legal consulting. The subject line read, "Update on Ethan and Madison." Curious, I opened it. Ethan had filed for bankruptcy. His lavish lifestyle had caught up with him, and without the company to fund his expenses, he was drowning in debt. Madison, the email revealed, had tried to sue Ethan for emotional damages, claiming he had manipulated her into their scheme. The case was thrown out, and she was left with nothing. The irony wasn't lost on me. Two people who had conspired to destroy me had ended up destroying each other. I stared at the email for a moment, then closed it. Their downfall no longer mattered to me. I had moved on, and they were just reminders of a life I had left behind. As I walked out of my office that evening, the city lights glowing softly in the distance, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The scars of what had happened would always be there, but they no longer defined me. I had taken back control of my life, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited for what the future held. This wasn't just the end of their story, it was the beginning of mine.